5 Live Boxing.
On Saturday night, Kell Brook will step into the ring against the most feared boxer on the planet. Our boxing correspondent Mike Costello will be there. So, Mike, tell us just how good is Gennady Golovkin?
Well, he's unbeaten in 10 years as a professional, 35 fights, 32 have finished inside the distance, the last 22 all inside the distance, 16 of them in world title fights. He hasn't fought a great name, the critics say, but he's made a mess of some very good ones.
Steve Bunce will be part of our team as well, as always. Bunce, why on earth would Kell Brook put his unbeaten record on the line against a man who is 2 weight divisions heavier than where he normally fights?
Yeah, he's had to put on 13 pounds in muscle, and it has to be muscle, can't be flab. And believe it or not, it's not just the money. Of course it's the money, but I also believe that there's a little bit in Kell Brook, a little bit of stupidity, a little bit of ridiculous bravery, that he does genuinely want to test himself. The fact he's walking away with a career-high purse, that's a bonus. I think Kell Brook likes to fight.
We will break down what could be a momentous night at the O2 on Saturday. And we'll get the latest on Anthony Joshua's plans. Tyson Fury and Vladimir Klitschko's rematch finally is in the diary. And much more. You can get involved as well. Text us on 85058 or it's at 5 Live Sport on social media.
This is 5 Live Sport.
So welcome to the show. I'm Eleanor Oldroyd and we're talking boxing for the next hour on 5 Live Sport. Kell Brook versus Gennady Golovkin will be live on Saturday night from 10 o'clock on 5 Live with Mike and Bunce, who are with me in the studio tonight. Now, before we get into the ins and outs of the fight, you've seen both men in the flesh today at the final press conference. Mike, how are they looking?
Well, first of all, it was a huge turnout, which is always an indication of the magnitude of the fight. Massive turnout at a hotel by Canary Wharf down by the waterside, and Kell Brook, I thought, looked more subdued than at any stage in the build-up so far. That's not a surprise. We're getting closer and closer to fight time, but there does seem to be, as Steve was alluding to there, genuine excitement in Kell Brook about the prospect of pulling off what would be just about the greatest upset ever achieved by a British boxer. We could argue about that, but it wouldn't be far from the very best. I think there's also this almost infectious confidence around Brook and his camp that they genuinely believe there's a performance in Kell Brook that none of us have seen so far, and that it will be dragged from him by Golovkin. As for Golovkin, I thought he looked drawn today, and I was surprised by how drawn he looked. I met him earlier this week on Monday, interviewed him at his hotel in central London, close to Charing Cross Station, and I was struck again there by how fresh-faced he looked, as he has done every time I've interviewed him in the past. Today, I thought, admittedly from a distance in the press conference room, he looked quite drawn, like somebody who's struggling at the weight, and we know he isn't. Because a month ago, the WBC, one of the governing bodies involved on Saturday night, did a check weigh-in, a 30-day weigh-in, as they call it, and he was only 5 pounds over the middleweight limit. We know that he's a Carl Froch type, a Floyd Mayweather type. He lives the life. There's never been an issue, as far as he's concerned, with the weight. So that's why I was surprised today. It might just be a case of jet lag. I was also surprised earlier in the week to find that they'd only arrived on Sunday for a fight of this magnitude. He now lives in California, 8 time zones away. Having said that, he hasn't boxed here in the UK before, but he has boxed in Europe since moving to California in 2010. He's boxed in Monaco, so he knows all about the transition. He knows what his body needs, he knows what his mind needs, and so you'd expect him to be in tip-top shape come fight time. But he did leave quite quickly to go back to his hotel. So I think what it does is adds a fascinating element now to tomorrow's weigh-in, and we'll see what he looks like on the scales.
Now, the weight issue is particularly interesting, Ellie, because not only was he only a couple of pounds over a week or so ago, he claims that he's 5 or 6 pounds over for as long as a month, for as much as a month. Here's a guy that not only doesn't have weight issues, it's quite the reverse. He can't really go up in weight. You'd think that if there were big fights in the weight division above 6-7 pounds heavier, he can't do it, and he would look unnatural if he were to put weight on. This is where he is. This is where he stands. Although what's interesting, Mike, is I've had a look at some of the figures for when he rehydrates. That means after he's weighed in and he needs to weigh in the next day, and sometimes he's as much as about 172. So he does put on 12 or so pounds, which is really odd considering he claims sometimes to be a month at 5 or 6 pounds over. Where's the other 7 or 8 pounds come from? Surely that's unnecessary surplus.
And what you have to do is judge him on what he's done in the past. He knows, and that's why I made the...
He knows his body.
He's boxed here in Europe before, so he knows what it takes. You know, he's had 35 professional fights now. He's had 16 world title fights, you know, having to get down to that limit the whole time. So, you know, he knows the protocol and he's been there so many times before. So you have to trust him what he's done and what he knows.
Well, we'll talk more about Golovkin later, but first let's concentrate on Kell Brook. He's moving up nearly a stone in weight to take this fight from the welterweight limit of 11 stone 7 to the middleweight 12.5 stone. And when BBC Sports' Ben Durs went to see him last week, he asked whether that's let him approach training differently.
There's nothing really changed too much from being welterweight. I'm pushing myself very, very hard, even more so, because I've got the fuel in me. My body's had a response where it's dropping nice weight in an healthy way, you know, because I'm giving myself all these calories, but I'm able to push myself, drain a lot of them calories away by doing the training sessions.
There is a sense that you can't win. You were criticised for some of your recent opponents. People said they weren't world class. Now you've gone and signed to fight Golovkin. There's people saying this is a suicide mission. This is madness. What would you say to them?
For them people, they need to tune in September 10th, and I took this fight straight away. You know, I know what I can do when I'm put under pressure. You know, this guy, I've stood next to him. You know, he might be a very powerful puncher. He might have extraordinary power, but I believe I've got the better feet, the better boxing skill, and I also can punch with bad intentions. If he comes in there thinking he took me lightly and he's fighting this welterweight who's moved to middleweight, he's going to be in a massive shock. You know, if he comes in there trying to take my head off, I hope he does, because he's going to leave himself and I'm going to take him out.
He's got this formidable knockout record. Do you fear Golovkin? And if so, is that a positive emotion?
Yeah, there's fear in every fight I go in. You know, I think more so this one. I'm fighting in territory I've not been, used to, middleweight, and a big puncher who's the man in boxing. But that's healthy. You know, I think that's very healthy. It's going to keep me very alert, very sharp. You know, that's a dangerous fighter.
And if you do pull this off, presumably it would make you the best pound for pound fighter in the world. How exciting does that sound?
It's untalkable. I'd be the best fighter in every weight category in boxing. I'd be the man. There's no one above me pulling this off, and you know, that's what I struggle with sleeping with at night. You know, how excited I am, you know, to go in there and I'm gonna show everyone what I'm about. You know, Saturday.
And you do seem remarkably relaxed.
I am very relaxed. You know, end of the day, I were, you know, minutes away from dying with my leg hanging off. I've had other things happening to me in my life. You know, this is a sport. It's boxing. You know, it's this. You know, it's candy feed to me. You know, I'm fighting a man with 2 arms and 2 legs like me and you. You know, I'm very fit. I'm very healthy, and I'm going in there to win. You know, that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to win.
Well, that was Kell Brook talking to the BBC's Ben Durs. Before we go any further, Steve, just remind people who don't know the story why he talked about being minutes away from dying with his leg hanging off.
With my leg hanging off. What happened was he was on holiday in the Canary Islands, if I'm not mistaken, Tenerife, if I'm not mistaken. It all gets a bit blurred. And he had a long night out, a long late night out, just after he won the title back in 2014. And the long and the short of it is he got attacked by somebody wielding a machete. And you often hear about people being attacked by someone wielding a machete, and you think, well, sure, that would kill you. Well, it nearly did. The gruesome pictures that emerged taken from his bedside. He was rushed into hospital, having left tons of his blood, or gallons of his blood all over the street. And the pictures were gruesome. The wounds themselves are gruesome. And it's testimony to him and the team he put together that he's walking, let alone fighting, let alone competing at the top. But it did put his career back, without a doubt. Plus, At a time when he should have been pushing on, I thought he was going to have a nice big November fight in 2014. There was all sorts of names being mentioned, and they fancied him because he'd gone out to America to beat Sean Porter, who at the time was unbeaten and was a champion, and was tipped to go on to great things. So he'd beaten Sean Porter on home turf. Other Americans fancied it. TV companies in America fancied it. The next thing we know, Kell's nearly dead in a hospital. It was Tenerife, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And so it put the career back a little bit, and it's testimony to how he's gone on. And he's absolutely right. His leg was, so I'm told, genuinely hanging off, Mike.
And momentum is so important.
Unbelievable.
In the career. And having just won the world title, the world welterweight title, with a win, we're talking about an upset this weekend, possibly. It was nothing on that scale, but he wasn't expected to beat Sean Porter in the United States, and he did, on points as well. And just when he could have really gained momentum and boosted his stock in terms of his reputation beyond boxing, tending to go crossover, but he lost that momentum, and that was valuable.
And you talk about momentum, Mike, but bear in mind, that was in August of 2014. He was first meant to fight for that world title in September of 2013. So he'd already lost momentum. He cried his eyes out on one show. I had him on the phone. I had to get him off the show because 2 fights had fallen through for a world title against Devon Alexander. So he'd lost momentum there. He took Sean Porter, short end money, overseas, not written off as the underdog, came back, should have been on a spectacular roll to big fights. And the big fights come at 13 pounds heavier and 2 years and 1 month later.
Yeah, so why has it been so hard for him to find people who want to fight him at his own weight division, or the weight division that he's world champion in?
Well, there are lots of reasons why fights don't happen, but it's not unlike the situation that Gennady Golovkin faces in the welterweight division. Kell Brook, especially in the United States, and we talk about momentum, when he won that fight in the United States, if he really wanted to build the stock and the reputation that he has across the boxing world and not just here in this country, then there were no shortage of American fighters he could have taken on. And they're all still around now, the likes of Danny Garcia and
Keith
Thurman as well. Those are the kind of fights that would have greatly boosted his stock. But at the same time, Kell Brook is a dangerous puncher, and they saw what he did when he went to the United States and beat Sean Porter. Not just a dangerous puncher, but he's a very, very skilled boxer as well. And that's why it's been too much risk against a name who wasn't big enough in the United States to take that kind of risk, given the reward that was available.
We'll talk a little bit later on about how hard it can be to move up weight divisions, and the fighters who've done it successfully and the fighters who've not done it quite so successfully, including Amir Khan, who we saw just earlier this year. But Steve, what will he have had to put himself through to go up nearly an entire stone in weight to be able to fight at that heavier weight?
Well, most people seem to think, that's okay because Kell naturally walks around at about 14 stone, which he might do. But if he trains hard, he gets down to 147 pounds. So he gets down to 10 stone 7. He has to train really hard to get down to that, Ellie. He can probably train quite hard and get down to about 10, 11. Because believe it or not, these fighters, they know exactly where they are to within an ounce. They know if they're 10-9, 10-9.5, 10-10. So he can probably do 10-11, 10-12 quite comfortably. Seems absurd to most people. That's how a fighter knows himself. What he's had to do here is go all the way up. It's 13 pounds difference. And what he's had to do is had to eat. Let's get it right. He's had to eat. He's had to be on an astronomical high-calorie diet. And that's what he's saying there. It's allowing me to train harder and train more. So he's been fueling his body. I would imagine he's been fueling his body with nothing more scientific than good old-fashioned meals, and I really mean that. He would have been having plenty of rehydration drinks and plenty of supplements, but it's not the supplements that have given him the extra bulk, which he's turned into muscle. It's not the supplements that have given him the extra energy. It will be good, straightforward, massive. We're talking here about 6 poached eggs and 2 breasts of chicken, Jeff Capes-style breakfast. That's where he's got to where he is. And the key will be, Mike, and there's a famous, Graham Houston reminded me of, there's a famous expression that Emmanuel Stewart, the great trainer, used to have, is a guy can go up in weight, but what happens when they go bone to bone? then we'll find out if he's really a middleweight or if he's just a big welterweight carrying 13 extra pounds. And that's going to be really interesting to see the first bell, the first clinch, to see who manhandles the other. I think that's going to be crucial. And then we'll work out whether the 8 eggs and the 3 chicken breasts worked.
And that's one of the fears, and that's one of the unknowns, because all of those that we use as reference points who've done it before, whether it's Sugar Ray Robinson, Sugar Ray Leonard, all those that have moved up successfully from welterweight to the middleweight division have done it over time, or they've at least stopped off on the way at light middleweight. Or, for example, Sugar Ray Robinson, who, you know, is many people's idea of the greatest fighter who ever laced on a pair of gloves, had 10 fights at middleweight before he fought for the world middleweight title, after already having been welterweight champion. So he gradually got himself acclimatized to that bone-to-bone feel, to that feel of the new weight, of being, even just in the clinches, you feel this much bigger man. You feel even the lighter punches. The jab is as hard as a right hand that you've ever felt from any of the great middleweights. So it's going to be really difficult. But I spoke to Kell today, and I thought it was quite enlightening to see him so relieved that tomorrow there isn't the first fight. For so many boxers, the first battle is the one against the scales, which they have to win on the day of the weigh-in. He's already, you know, he's comfortable about that. He was half a stone over with 7 days to go, but I was hearing today that he's been drinking an awful lot of water, not so much as a ploy to lull the Golovkin camp into a false sense of security, but just because he's got the freedom to do that.
And tell us a bit about the team who've brought him to this place, Steve.
Well, he's got... Well, first of all, Kell walks into a gym, depending on which one of my stories you believe, because I've changed the date several times, and I'm allowed to because I wrote the stories. So he walks into the gym at either 5, 6, 7 or 8, and his name's Ezekiel. So they call him Little Ezekiel. So Ezekiel's there, and it's the same time as Nassim Hamed's at his pump. And Ezekiel was kept almost like a little sort of performing dog, like a dog that went up on 2 legs and walked across the room. Because what he could do was backflips and forward rolls and tumbles. So Nas could do a little bit, but this little Ezekiel kid would do it with the gloves on. He'd do like 2 tumbles, 2 complete forward rolls, and then hit the speedball 13 times. And this is when he was under the guidance of the great whispering guru, originally from Dublin, Brendan Ingle, who runs this gym up in Winkerbank on the outskirts of Sheffield. And it's a beautiful gym. It's a beautiful life. And Brendan ran the gym and he trained Nassim Hamed, and he just had Ezekiel, or Kell as he became known, with him. So when he was 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, he'd be in the car going to these fights. And then, of course, he had a bit of a career for himself as an amateur, but he was a bit unorthodox for the GB system, Ellie. So he turned professional, and it had a slow start as a pro. It's very interesting because I was talking to John Ingle, who's one of Brendan's son, who's one of the trainers, but not the main trainer, who's mostly a matchmaker. And he was saying, Steve, people forget that once or twice, Kell never got paid, because sometimes he'd box on small shows, on dinner shows, and what we call a northern club circuit. I hate to sound like some Will Tappers and Shunters club here, but he'd fight on these tiny shows on the northern club circuit, and the guy would come to him at the end of the night and say, look, I can't give you 400 quid, son. I've only done 200 in tickets. Here's 50. Here's your tax. Here's your fare back. So this is where Kell came from. He may be in a multi-million-pound fight on Saturday, but when he started out as a pro, he was on a tiny and forgotten circuit. So he's got Brendan Ingle, this great whispering guru, in the background. He's got Dominic Ingle, big hulking, muscle-bound guy who's into all the science, and he's into all lots of weight training and lots of stuff like that. Then he's got John as a kind of soothing guy, a kind of calming guy. That's his background. He's been, in many ways, apart from a fight against a guy called Carson Jones a few years ago, he hasn't really broken a sweat for a long time.
With Golovkin's trainer in the corner.
Golovkin's trainer in the corner, yeah.
And it's interesting, you know, going back to what Steve was saying about the gym at St Thomas's Church Hall in Winkerbank, an area in Sheffield, which was first opened by Brendan Ingle in 1964. And Kell Brook, I was reading, Steve, didn't take to it at first, in those early days, because Brendan Ingle was big about this notion that not everybody is going to leave here, like Hamed, Johnny Nelson, Junior Witter, Kell Brook as a world champion.
Ryan Rhodes.
He wanted to round every character so that when they left the gym, they were ready to take on and acquit themselves in any situation, anywhere. So he would do, for example, he would make Kell Brook or Nassim Hamed in their early days get into the middle of the ring in front of the whole gym and sing a nursery rhyme. Or he would make somebody go and talk to the wall, just to build the character around these young lads, so that and young women in the end, so that when they went through those doors for the last time, they were ready to take on whatever job they they chose to do.
We used to go. I used to go up to Brendan's gym quite a lot. Sorry, Ellie. I remember one particular trip. We went to a prison and we had to lie and say that Kell was 18. He was about 12. But because what they used to do is to go in and spar with the prisoners, and the key was that the boxers couldn't hit the prisoners, but the prisoners could try all they like to hit them. So Naz would go in, and of course this is before Naz was world champion, and Johnny Nelson would go in, and no one could hit him. And I remember little Kell actually in the ring in one of these prison sessions. Mikey was no more than about 14, and we're in a high security prison with all these lunatics in blue and plimsolls trying to knock him out. And of course, I went to prison about 4 times with Brendan and his guys. No, I never saw one prisoner hit one boxer.
I tell you what, that's what you call character building. Kell Brook against Gennady Golovkin is live on 5 Live on Saturday night from 10 o'clock from the O2 with Mike and Bunce at ringside. And now Golovkin has a similar problem to Kell Brook, as we've mentioned, in that he's struggled to make the big fights at his own weight. And Mike, you were there ringside in Vegas earlier this year, weren't you, when Canelo Alvarez knocked out Amir Khan. And most of the talk after that fight was about a unification bout between Canelo and Golovkin. So what happened?
Well, that's probably the biggest money fight out there. And you know, as across the boxing world, that's probably the most sought-after fight at the moment. And on the night afterwards, the press conference, which was hosted by Oscar De La Hoya, the head of Golden Boy Promotions, who look after Canelo Alvarez, most of that was taken up with questions about when will the fight against Gennady Golovkin happen? Because at that stage, the WBC middleweight belt was held by Saul Canelo Alvarez, and the WBC had said that if you don't agree to fight Gennady Golovkin within a couple of weeks, we're going to take the title from you and hand it over to Golovkin, which is what happened because they didn't come to any kind of agreement. Oscar De La Hoya said on that night, the Saturday night, which was creeping into Sunday morning, the first thing I do on Monday morning is to ring Golovkin's people and this fight will happen. It's not happening. Canelo Alvarez on Saturday week is fighting Britain's Liam Smith in Texas. So we still wait for this fight to happen. It might well be that Golden Boy Promotions believe that this situation with Canelo Alvarez for their company is so vital to the future of their company, and he is so profitable for their company that they cannot afford to put him in with Gennady Golovkin. My own feeling is that he's plenty tough enough to go the distance with Golovkin, I feel, and that if it was a good enough fight, then we could do the rematch and maybe once again. But
let's make no bones about this, Steve. Gennady Golovkin, Triple G, he is feared, isn't he? You have this image of him as this ruthless Kazakhstani with an amazing ability to knock people out. But what's he really like outside the ring?
Well, funny enough, I've spoken today to a guy that fought him last year, in about February or January of last year. Went 11 rounds of him, and every single second of those rounds, and he can remember every second of it, was painful and horrible. And Golovkin knew how tough this guy was, Martin Murray from St Helens. He knew how tough Martin Murray was, so he never took any risks. He just slowly took it to him and battered him until the referee had to intervene in the 11th round. And the first thing Martin Murray said to me was that, Steve, he said, sometimes you want really good guys to be really good guys. He said, and most of the time in boxing, the really good fighters are not good guys. He used a word I can't use on radio. And I'll be honest with you, this little group of us here, we've known each other a long while. Martin Murray's absolutely spot on. He said, but with him, not only is he a great fighter, the best I've ever been in with, and that includes other world champions. He's lost a couple of other world title fights, and best I've ever sparred with. He said, but what a fantastic fella. He made his stay in Monte Carlo brilliant. And there was a fantastic picture tweeted out by the two of them, by Golovkin and by Murray after the fight with the two of them. And Golovkin, of course, looks about 17. Looks like he hasn't changed his body shape since he was 17. And Martin Murray, well, his face had been put together like Mr. Potato Head. No disrespect to him in Toy Story. And I love Martin. He's an old friend. But there was a bit of his face there and a bit of it here. And the two of them, and you can just about work out a smile on Martin Murray's face. And he said, Steve, he's a really fantastic guy. We know he does a lot back with the Kazakh community, from where he's from, and does a lot internationally with the Kazakh community. Wherever he fights, he brings out the Kazakh community. And it wouldn't surprise me at all. And we were ringside, of course, in Rio when three Kazakhs won gold medals. It wouldn't surprise me at all if there's a good a good sprinkling of Kazakh flags, and they have that fantastic headdress, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
The Kazakhs and the Uzbeks have brilliant headdress, in all fairness, if you ride bareback on a yak for 1,000 miles, you can wear what you like on your head. I always think that. I really do. And so I wouldn't be at all surprised if there's upwards of 500 Kazakhs in the venue. And my understanding is just the nicest fella in the world, Mike.
I was telling you, Steve, that I met him on Monday in a much more sedate surroundings than today at the press conference. He looked really fresh-faced. But what struck me, and it's not the first time, is just how much he loves to fight.
Yeah.
For example, I was listening to an interview just recently with an American prospect called Errol Spence, who, if Kell Brook had stayed at welterweight, might well have been his next opponent. He's the mandatory challenger in line. And he talks about it being a job, and it's a chore. And when he wakes up in the morning, he dreads what he has to do. Whereas Golovkin, you get the sense, absolutely loves to fight. I was talking to him on Monday, and at one stage, just talking about boxing and about the need to hurt an opponent, and he started laughing. And it struck me, and I said this to a mate when I got home, it was like two 6-year-olds talking about the prospect of a pillow fight. Come on, let's go and do it. Yeah. And he just loves to fight. It just so happens he's pretty good at it and well paid at it. But he loves to fight.
You've been getting an insight into him from his trainer.
Yes, Abel Sanchez, who we've already mentioned. They've been together since 2010 when Golovkin moved to the United States because he was unhappy with how his career was being guided in Germany, where he was first based after turning professional following the 2005 World Championships in the amateur game. And what we've seen evolve since then is this perfect blend of Soviet-style discipline and rigour and hunger, allied to this Mexican attacking instinct of his trainer, Sanchez. And Sanchez, one of the first things he did when they got together in his gym was showed him a whole load of videos of the great Mexican, probably the greatest Mexican of all time, and that's some accolade, Julio Cesar Chavez, about ring craft, about cutting off the ring. And talking about cutting off the ring, he also showed him some videos of what are called cutting horses, who separate cattle from the herd on ranches and farms, in particular in the United States. And he showed him these videos, and he told me about this particular training method.
It was cutting horses, dividing a calf out of, they put 10 calves out there and put a marker on one of them, and the horse cuts it out of the herd without letting it get away from them. And because I've always said that great fighters, the one trait that they all have, other than their skills, is intelligence. And he saw how this horse was going to a particular spot where that calf was going to be, and it cut off half of the distance for him as far as steps. And if you look at some of the videos now or some of the fights, he does that so adeptly. He just goes to a spot and it cuts off half of the effort, I guess is the best way to put it.
And in terms of this astonishing knockout record and stoppage record, is it sheer natural power, or is it the way he punches as well?
No, a lot of it has to do, he was born with heavy hands, but there's a lot of guys that were born with heavy hands that are not as precise as he is. I think his work in the gym with the techniques that we do in the gym and with the balance that we practice in the gym is very important for him to be always in position to punch. And we practice that daily in the gym. So technique and balance, but the most important thing I think is timing. The timing of when to throw the punch, when to let it go, when that guy's going to be there to accept the punch. So it's not just the power. I think that could be 25% of it. The rest of it, you can divide any way you want. But to me, timing is so important for him.
And he said that to me when I put it to him, that maybe in facing a welterweight, speed might be an issue and might be a factor in Kell Brook's favour. But he said timing will counter that.
Yeah. When these guys are intelligent and they're playing chess, they're waiting for moves, and when Kell repeats something, it's going to go in his brain bank, and he's going to remember that movement. And when Kell does that a couple times, the next time he does it, Gennady's going to already know where he's going to be. So the timing of the delivery of the punch or the movement is going to be very crucial, because that's what's going to win us the fight. I think it's not going to be the weight, it's not going to be the power, it's going to be the intelligence of one guy against the other.
Fascinating to listen to that, isn't it? How much credit do you think Abel Sanchez should take for what Golovkin has become?
A huge amount. I've watched most of his world title fights and some of those fights before then, if you search hard enough on the internet, you can pretty much find all 22 of these fights that he's won inside the distance in a row in his 35-fight career. And you can see the progression, and there is a distinct change in what he does from 2011 onwards. So, in other words, after he's been with Sanchez for about a year or so, he's much more calculated, he's much more patient. We were listening earlier on, half an hour or so ago now, to this interview with Kell Brook, where he said he's going to try and take my head off. That might be right, but he won't rush.
And he won't do it more than once. I mean, I've seen him in lots of fights. When one of my other jobs, we've had most of 7 or 8 of his world title fights, and he does a thing, and you actually see him shake his head and say, "No," I said, "Okay, I've tried that. I'll try something else." And you see him adjust his feet, you see him adjust his shoulders, and then he'll do something different, and then he'll connect. And you actually, Mike, I swear, you see him go, "Yep, that worked." And if he makes a mistake, and sometimes he can be guilty of having no respect for his opponent. I mean that in the nicest way. He doesn't stick his tongue out. He doesn't shuffle in front of them. He doesn't touch them. He doesn't laugh at them. But he's got no respect because his hands were a bit low. In half a dozen of his 17 or so world title fights, Mike, he's taken punches he didn't need to take simply because he's lulled them into a false sense of security. He's also knocked people out with punches that I actually can't throw in a mirror. He throws a shot, that shot where he leans to the right, he leans his elbow up in the air, and he throws a sort of left hook where his elbow's higher than his head, and he's knocked people out behind the ear, not once or twice. It's not a freak shot. He throws a bizarre shot like he's throwing a boomerang, and he throws it intentionally. So he absolutely enjoys hurting people. He enjoys getting to people. There's no two ways about it. But what Abel Sanchez has done is, I think Abel Sanchez has instilled a little bit of American fighting culture in him. So he's not like other Kazakhs, Uzbeks, other Eastern Bloc fighters, other fighters who have trickled over from what was the Eastern Bloc and the Iron Curtain 25 years ago. When he steps it up, Mike, he's great to watch, okay? And when he's getting things wrong, you know he's going to step it up. He's great to watch, as a lot of old great fighters did when they get things wrong. I've seen Sugar Ray fights for Sugar Ray Robinson missing with shots and almost taking a second to work out why did that miss. You can see them calculating. It's that intelligence.
And it struck me, Steve, talking to Abel Sanchez the other day, that maybe we've hit on the perfect boxing style. If you could all the time marry that ex-Soviet military style, rigor, dedication, willingness to learn, which is Abel Sanchez said that he's a great listener and he's willing to take on board all of these new methods. And if you match that and marry that to the Mexican attacking instinct, then you've got this style that is not only so good to watch, but is so difficult to counter.
Well, can you imagine if you could have instilled that type of recklessness and a little bit more aggression in someone like Vladimir or Vitaly, the stuff that Emmanuel Stewart thought he could insert. Even Sergei Kovalev, the great Russian light heavyweight who knocks everybody out, even he's not that reckless or that American. And you're absolutely right, because one thing about the Eastern Bloc fighters, the ones that have been successful in the last, say, 15 or so or 17 or so years, Ellie, is they've generally always had great amateur experience. They've generally won something at the Olympics or the World Amateur Championships, certainly the European Amateur Championships, and they've not really taken to their American trainers too well. If you think about Alexander Povetkin falling out with Teddy Atlas over, because Teddy Atlas said, I don't want him to fight like this. I want him to fight like this. He's got to fight like an American. We've got to do this. So what Golovkin's done is learn to maybe bite his tongue and take it in and listen. And that makes him unique as an Eastern Bloc fighter.
Kell Brook against Gennady Golovkin will be live on Saturday night from 10 o'clock on 5 Live. Let us talk just for a few minutes about the big fight this weekend. We were hoping to speak to somebody who fought Golovkin, but he's not answering his phone at the moment. So let's just chat around between us where this fight is going to be won and lost. And we've talked about the fact that this is almost a stone heavier than he normally fights for Kell Brook. So can he win it? Can he possibly win it against one of the most dangerous fighters in the world at the moment?
Well, look, my favourite author is Damon Runyon, and he always used to say that any contest between two members of the human race is an even money shot. So, you know, especially in boxing, we've all seen massive shocks. I mean, I would point out that Kell Brook is actually shorter in terms of the odds that have been chalked up by the bookmakers than I thought he would be. He's around, and there's been some significant money on him this week, without being crushing amounts of money, but he was on offer earlier in the week at around 6-1. Some bookmakers are now only offering 4-1, wow, which is around the odds that were chalked up for Tyson Fury a year ago against Vladimir Klitschko. So that's the kind of realm we're in here. We're not talking Buster Douglas against Mike Tyson here, although in the minds of some, I think it is.
It's wider
the way
in
it's
the
been
minds of
played
some.
up.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, I've been looking at so many of Golovkin's fights, trying to find, as Steve said, this flaw. Where is this chink that you think that Kell Brook might be able to just find a way through? But whatever he does, he's going to have to do it for at least 7 of the 12 rounds. And I watched one of his fights, where Golovkin has had not so much the most problems, but was given most to do, was against a young Ugandan called Kasim Umar, a former child soldier. And in the early rounds, he's really busy. He zips around the ring and he darts in and out and he uses his speed. He came up from a lower weight division as well, or in his case, it was light middleweight. And I just wonder if early on, if Kell Brook can just really believe in himself and get his speed going, get his fluidity going, then maybe there's a chance there. But I keep thinking I'm dreaming.
You can't generalise, can you? It's extra speed and extra mobility against the bigger punches. And this is what we had very much this conversation before Amir Khan fought Canelo Alvarez.
Yeah, we knew with Amir Khan, we knew that his chance was to go out fast and get faster, and somehow with 100 metres left in the 10,000 or the 12,000 metre sprint, to sprint even faster. We knew that's what he had to do. Every single thing that Amir Khan had to do was about fast and speed, and what Canelo Alvarez did, because the first 6 or 7 rounds, they were okay. Alvarez was winning them, Amir won a couple, but eventually Canelo Alvarez saw the gap, and it was this simple gap. He steps off to the right. Khan's left hand is down around his chest, and he hits him with the right hand on the side of the jaw, not on the front of the jaw, on the side of the jaw. He found it, he hit him, he knocked him out. It's not as simple with Kell, but you can't say Kell can just go in there and try and throw big, long jabs, like throw big right hands, and then move off to the side and try and claim Golovkin. Because Golovkin will change. Even if Abel Sanchez was taken ill, a la Mickey and Rocky, before the fight, Abel Sanchez, the spirit, would be in the corner, and Golovkin would know enough from his hundreds of amateur contests and his 30-odd professional fights to change and adapt. He will not lose 2 rounds consecutively unless he's hit on the chin and he doesn't know where he is. That's not a bold statement. That's a statement of fact. Kell could win 2 rounds, don't worry, but he'd have to win 2 rounds by completely different means. He'd have to win 1 round by running and 1 round by going forward and trying to catch him. It's such a big ask. However, there is a slight glimmer at the end of that Kell Brook tunnel, and that's in the fact that Mike and other people picked up today on the fact that Golovkin didn't look quite right, looked a bit out of sorts, looked a bit weight drained, and I always hate to hear that when I hear fighters are weight drained, especially fighters I personally know do not struggle with the weight.
Let's look to the end of the fight, Mike, and you're going to be calling either Gennady Golovkin as the winner or Kell Brook as the winner. If Golovkin wins, where does that place him in the pantheon of great fighters? If Kell Brook wins, where does that place the fight in the pantheon of great upsets? Well,
the issue for Gennady Golovkin is that what's at stake here for him, yes, is his reputation and is a hefty purse. In terms of enhancing that reputation, I don't think that can happen because it will be dismissed as a win against a welterweight champion. So he can only damage his reputation by losing the fight. If he wins the fight, he doesn't enhance his reputation. He just gets an awful lot richer, and he waits and he waits and he waits again for either Daniel Jacobs or Saul Canelo Alvarez would be the favoured option to say yes. And we're hearing that might not happen for another 18 months or so. So but if Kell Brook is to win, then suddenly you've got a crossover star here. Even though it's on pay-per-view on television, this is one of those that will just seep through. Everybody in sport, everybody who follows sport will know about this by the early part of next week, because this will go down, forget about boxing, this will go down as one of the great performances by any British sportsman in history.
Yeah. Triple G has got a bit of momentum behind him. People that are not boxing enthusiasts are starting to understand, is this guy called Triple G? Is he a Russian geezer? Is he a Kazakh? Is he an Uzbek? People are starting to talk about him. I don't mean grannies with their trolleys in Waitrose or the Co-op. It's not quite Nassim Hamid or Nigel Benn or Frank Bruno, but people are talking about him. And of course, the one thing, if Kell Brook did somehow pull off a shock and stop a weight-drained Gennady Golovkin or cut him or outpoint him, which is about the only one of those that makes any sense in some way, there would be a rematch. And knowing Golovkin and Golovkin's people, it would be very, very, very soon.
You can hear the fight live on 5 Live. Kell Brook against Gennady Golovkin will be live on Saturday night from around about 10 p.m. Mike, Bunce and former world heavyweight champion David Hay are our team at ringside. Mike, Bunce, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ellie.
Thanks, Ellie.
Great fun, as always.